Hey, welcome back to another video of I Felt the Dark. Without wasting any time, let's dive into a domestic crime case from Chicago, USA. There's a chance the culprit is a modern-day serial killer. Stick around until the end to uncover the trail of the perpetrator, who turns out to be a police officer, and how the Chicago police seem to ignore the victim. So listen up. Drew W. is the oldest of 3 siblings. His dad was a Marine, and their family was known for being very disciplined and rule-bound. By the age of 17, Drew had already earned his pilot's license. Even though his family wasn't rich, his parents supported him, hoping he'd join the military one day. But before he could join, Drew met Carol, a high school friend, and they got married young in 1974 when they were both just 17. Drew eventually joined the military, but decided to quit 2 years later for some reason. After leaving, he went back to Bolingbrook and started working as a police officer. At that time, he worked undercover, so he was often out on the streets, more like a field cop. A few years into their marriage, as they went through various ups and downs, Carol started hearing rumors that Drew was cheating on her with another woman. Soon after, Carol filed for divorce and got full custody of their 2 kids. Even though the divorce happened, Drew didn't seem too bothered by losing his wife, since he felt he was still young and had plenty of women to enjoy and keep him company. At 27, Drew started hitting up nightclubs more often and met a young woman named Kyle. Even though he knew Kyle was underage, he still took her out to have fun at clubs and then back to motels. As a police officer, Drew's dark side began to show. He became extremely protective, even to the point of paranoia. He tried to control and follow Kyle wherever she went, wanting to know who she was with and where she was at all times. He always suspected she was lying to him and was afraid of being betrayed. When things got really uncomfortable, Kyle decided to report Drew to the police after a physical fight between them. However, the officers who showed up were Drew's colleagues, so the report didn't go any further. After their relationship ended, the case remained unresolved. Feeling frustrated with Kyle, Drew teamed up with his colleagues to mess with her. They issued multiple tickets for unpaid fines and took them straight to court. Kyle was shocked when she was arrested by the police and taken to court, where Drew happened to be the arresting officer. Drew seemed to want to flex his power over Kyle, turning the situation around and using it as revenge for Kyle's earlier report accusing him of abuse. Kyle felt extremely stressed by the whole ordeal. Drew, who was also the arresting officer, appeared to be asserting his authority and trying to teach Kyle a lesson. Not long after that, Kyle met a businessman. Their relationship developed, and she moved on from Drew's grip. At the same time, Drew became interested in Vicky Connolly, who was 23. They met at the same bar they both frequented, and Vicky was going through a divorce at the time. Even though Vicky wasn't ready for a serious relationship, Drew kept pushing and begging for them to be together. After several dates and sexual encounters where Drew tried to fulfill Vicky's fantasies, she eventually gave in and agreed to a more serious relationship. A little while after her divorce was finalized, Drew quickly married Vicky. However, their honeymoon wasn't as perfect as Vicky had hoped. Drew soon displayed aggressive behavior. Besides physical violence, Drew often used harsh words, threats, and insults to demean and control Vicky. This included calling her names like ugly vagina, stinky asshole, unattractive butt, fat woman, and woman with a foul-smelling vagina, among other things. This behavior caused Vicky a lot of stress and led to depression shortly after their marriage. After repeatedly violating police ethics, Drew was finally fired from the force. He was caught protecting drug dealers he was supposed to arrest, using them as an extra source of income. Drew was also involved in several altercations with his police colleagues. Following his dismissal, Drew and Vicky had to downsize from their big house to a smaller one. With the loss of his police job and income from protecting drug dealers, they faced financial instability. To cope with their financial problems, they decided to open a small bar called Sue's Pub next to their home. Unfortunately, after getting fired, Drew couldn't handle reality. His behavior got weirder and more aggressive. He often acted out, controlling Vicky aggressively and verbally abusing her with the nasty stuff I mentioned earlier. Honestly, I can't even stand repeating those harsh words. He even resorted to domestic violence. At one of his peaks of rage, Drew threatened Vicky with a weapon, saying he could make her disappear and make it look like an accident. This made Vicky terrified and pressured to file for divorce and leave Drew. During their divorce process, Drew started seeing a new woman named Kathleen Savio. With his knack for manipulation, Drew managed to get Kathleen to give herself to him without any conditions. While still married to Vicky, Drew had several affairs with Kathleen, engaging in an illicit relationship. Drew played on Kathleen's sympathy by complaining about his messed up personal life and blaming Vicky for all his problems. He told Kathleen that Vicky was a drug addict who spent all his money, forcing him to borrow from his colleagues. Drew even claimed this led to fights with his police coworkers, which ultimately got him fired. All of this was a lie, just to win Kathleen's sympathy. Kathleen, feeling sorry for Drew, tried to keep him calm and happy despite his troubles. She was willing to do anything to keep their relationship intact. At that time, Kathleen, longing for intimacy and emotional connection, found herself falling in love with Drew. Their relationship quickly developed, fulfilling the emotional needs she'd been missing in her life. But just a few days before the court finalized their divorce, Vicky had a serious car accident. On her way back from the bar, she was speeding and suddenly her brakes failed. Her car rolled over on the road, putting Vicky into a coma for a week. When she woke up, and after undergoing several surgeries, she found out that all her assets had been transferred to Drew, thanks to a court decision made while she was still in a coma. Unbeknownst to Vicky, their divorce was finalized while she was in the hospital. The court accepted Drew's story that Vicky had been using her money to buy drugs, which he claimed caused the severe accident that left her disabled. In reality, Drew had been secretly following Vicky wherever she went. When he saw the opportunity, Drew decided to sabotage Vicky's car. That night, while Vicky was at the bar with friends, Drew accessed her car unnoticed and tampered with the brake system. Knowing a bit about car mechanics, Drew carefully disabled crucial components like the brake lines or hydraulic system. He made the sabotage look like a slow leak, so the brake failure wouldn't be obvious right away, eventually causing Vicky's accident. Drew also knew Vicky often drove fast, making his plan even more effective. Not long after, Drew married Kathleen, feeling she was a good match for him. As for Kathleen's personal life, she had a complicated relationship with her father in the past. Growing up in a conflict-ridden family, she and her siblings decided to leave home as teenagers. After such a tough life experience, Kathleen chose to avoid romantic relationships until she longed for a man's affection. Besides, she always yearned for a safe and financially stable life. After marrying Drew, Kathleen felt like she'd finally found the happiness she'd been dreaming of. Before that, Kathleen had been obsessed with her sex life and believed that marrying Drew would bring her blessings in terms of sexual fulfillment, financial stability, and a comfortable life. She also hoped that their marriage would give her a big, safe, and stable home. But just like with Drew's previous wives, his bad traits started to resurface. A year into their marriage, Kathleen ended up in the hospital because of Drew's physical abuse. Even though she was embarrassed to admit what happened, she lied to the nurses and claimed her injuries were from a fall down the stairs at home. After 10 years of marriage, dealing with physical abuse and trying to be patient, Kathleen and Drew had 2 kids and lived in a big house. But then something shocking came to light. Kathleen received an anonymous letter from a 17-year-old girl who revealed that she was seeing someone named Drew, who was now 47. This drama involving the police eventually led to their separation. Drew then married the younger woman, Stacy, who was 19 at the time. Not long after, Drew's new wife, Stacy, found out she was pregnant and gave birth to a son a few months later. Even though Drew and Kathleen were divorced, Drew chose to live not far from Kathleen, just a couple of blocks away. He did this to keep an eye on Kathleen and put pressure on her, especially when he came over to visit their kids. Feeling increasingly threatened, Kathleen finally asked for legal protection and reported it to the police. She said Drew had made threats against her, making Kathleen believe he might do something dangerous. Drew threatened Kathleen, but then suddenly left without following through. Despite Kathleen reporting this to the police multiple times, Drew always managed to twist the situation and convince them that Kathleen was the one causing problems and seeking attention. Because of Drew's constant manipulation, Kathleen's reports were often ignored. Feeling hopeless with the police, Kathleen ended up writing a letter to the district attorney. In her letter, she explained that Drew was very skilled at manipulating the police due to his experience as a former cop. Kathleen also expressed her belief that Drew planned to take custody of their kids and was a serious threat to her safety, including physical violence. She begged the authorities to act before it was too late. A few years later, one night, Drew broke into Kathleen's house by forcing open the back door without leaving any trace. He got into Kathleen's house without anyone knowing about it. Unfortunately, the letters Kathleen sent to the district attorney and the police weren't taken seriously. 2 years after sending the letters, Kathleen was found dead in her bathroom under suspicious circumstances. A few days before, Kathleen had met with Drew and their kids, but the next day, Kathleen was missing, and her house was locked from the inside. Drew, suspicious because his ex-wife wasn't coming out of the house, found an excuse to visit Kathleen's locked-up place. He asked a nearby neighbor to help break down the door, claiming his kids needed to get some school stuff from Kathleen's house. Once the door was busted open, they started looking for Kathleen. While checking the house, they smelled something awful coming from the second floor. The neighbors eventually found Kathleen dead in the dry bathtub, bruised and beaten up. The police concluded after their investigation that Kathleen had fallen and got stuck in the bathtub with no one around to help her. The police interrogated Drew, but it felt pretty laid back, almost like a chat at a cafe, since the officer questioning him was Drew's good buddy from the force. During the interrogation, Drew talked a lot of trash about Kathleen, trying to paint her in a bad light and shift the focus away from himself. Stacy, who was pregnant at the time, was also questioned to verify Drew's alibi for the night Kathleen died. Stacy assured the police that Drew was at their place all night, hanging out with the kids. However, she admitted that Drew was sleeping with the kids that night and wasn't with her in the bedroom. So, Stacy didn't know what happened that night, but she believed Drew was with the kids because she saw him with them in the morning. After Kathleen's death and the court ruling, Drew got all of Kathleen's stuff, including the house, car, jewelry, and custody of their 2 kids. With this decision, Drew suddenly became wealthy, pocketing several $100,000 from Kathleen's estate. A few years after this, Stacy started facing physical abuse from Drew, just like Drew's previous ex-wives. Drew's bad behavior resurfaced, and Stacy decided to file for divorce. But Drew refused the divorce and tried hard to blame Stacy for all the issues in their home. Stacy, who had always been nice before, was now treated badly by Drew. However, the day after contacting a divorce lawyer, Stacy vanished without a trace. This was noticed because she was supposed to visit her sister Anna to help with home renovations. When Stacy didn't show up for over a week, Anna got worried and tried to contact Drew. Drew claimed Stacy had run off with another guy, taking her passport, bikini, and $50,000 in cash from Drew's personal locker. Anna, not believing Drew's story, reported it to the police. She was sure her sister wouldn't just leave her kids behind, but Drew insisted that Stacy had fled. He even said Stacy called him that day to say she'd never come back and that her car was left at the airport parking lot. Drew tried to convince everyone that Stacy was fine out there, even bringing Stacy's car from the airport back home. When news of Stacy's disappearance spread and hit the headlines in Chicago, Drew acted weird during media interviews. He laughed to himself, made inappropriate jokes, and even recorded journalists with his own camera. Drew blamed the reporters, claiming they were committing a crime by portraying him as the culprit and making Stacy disappear. Amid all this, the police got new information from Drew's brother, Thomas. Thomas had just gotten out of the hospital after dealing with emotional stress for a few months. Since Stacy went missing, Thomas had been trying to commit suicide, but had been saved in time. During an interrogation, Thomas revealed that a few days before Stacy was reported missing, Drew had approached him and asked for help with something dangerous, moving a large barrel from the second floor of his house into a rental box truck. The barrel contained something heavy. Drew offered Thomas money for his help, but refused to tell him what was inside. Neighbors saw the activity, but didn't find anything suspicious. After that, Drew dropped Thomas off at home and gave him about $3,000 as a reward, asking him not to spill the beans about what happened. A few days later, when Thomas found out that Stacy was missing, he started feeling like something was off. He thought Stacy's disappearance might be connected to the big drum they lowered together with Drew and the money he received. Thomas began to stress out about his involvement and worried that it might be part of a crime. Feeling pressured and scared of legal consequences, Thomas finally decided to come forward with the information to the police. But due to his deep fear and stress, he tried to commit suicide. Thomas was saved by a friend who found him in a critical condition and took him to the hospital. After receiving treatment, Thomas was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for a few months to recover. During this time, he stayed in the hospital and tried to keep a low profile from Drew while keeping an eye on Stacy's search. Thomas usually kept his distance and wasn't very involved in family matters, especially with his brother. But he started getting suspicious after hearing about the accident involving his sister-in-law. On the day Stacy disappeared, Thomas admitted that he helped Drew load a blue drum onto the rented box truck. The detectives, increasingly suspicious of Drew's involvement, decided to recheck Kathleen's autopsy results, which hadn't been given much attention before. The re-examination revealed some inconsistencies in Kathleen's death. The police started to realize that Drew might be connected to a series of unfortunate events involving his wives. The police continued to review Kathleen's files, showing that Drew had abused her before and after their divorce. Among the files was a letter from a local attorney containing Kathleen's complaints. However, the lawyer didn't take it seriously, dismissing it as Kathleen being jealous and wanting to get back with Drew. Sad, right, guys? This is a true story that happened in America. I want to care for the women I love. I'm committed to staying away from physical violence against women. Drew is really a piece of work. Okay, let's continue. The police also dropped the ball on Drew's ex-wives, who had problems after getting involved with him. Even though the police were initially reluctant to dig deeper, exactly 1 year after Stacy's mysterious disappearance, Drew was finally charged with Kathleen's murder. 4 years later, he was sentenced to 38 years in prison. While in prison, Drew was attacked by another inmate who tried to cut off a body part to sell to crime enthusiasts in the black market. Luckily, Drew was saved by the prison guards. After he recovered, Drew tried to get revenge and asked another inmate to take out a district attorney named James Glasgow, who he blamed for his sentence. Unfortunately, that inmate turned out to be an informant. So, even though Drew thought he was talking to a hitman, he was actually chatting with an undercover cop. It's weird, isn't it, how an informant can record conversations in prison? Maybe there's some high-tech gadget straight out of a movie? Drew clearly didn't think this through, and their conversation was recorded and handed over to the police. Despite Drew's attempts to deflect and change the subject when asked about Stacy, the recording added 2 more years to his sentence, making it 40 years total. So, if there's one lesson from this story, it's don't trust new friends. In prison, they might be talking more to a microphone than to you. Still, Stacy's whereabouts remain a mystery. For 17 years, Anna, Stacy's sister, has been trying to find out what really happened. In 2024, Anna posted a photo on her Facebook account showing a human skull found at the bottom of a canal. This find gives new hope that the skull might belong to Stacy, located a few kilometers from her home in a remote area. If true, Drew could face additional charges for this case and end up with more than 40 years in prison or even a life sentence, since Chicago doesn't have the death penalty for the deaths of his 2 wives. It's so sad, guys. I really feel for the women who've suffered from violence. Thanks a lot for watching this story. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and if you have any questions or comments, drop them below. See you in the next video.